It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday dinner, just like the dozens that came before. Simple, predictable, with roast chicken and potatoes, and a side of silence that we'd grown accustomed to. I, Silas Reed, had settled into the habit of these evenings, knowing the routine. Belle, my wife, would sip her wine with that tight-lipped smile, her eyes vaguely distant. Maya, our daughter, would scroll on her phone between bites, barely looking up. And I'd pretend everything was fine, meticulously orchestrating my own performance of contentment. But tonight felt different. Like the air itself carried a static charge that threatened to ignite with the slightest friction. Belle sat across from me in the same ornate dining chair she'd claimed for years, her posture too perfect, her eyes too sharp, assessing me with an almost clinical detachment. Maya, 17 and already armed with her mother's disdain, twirled a strand of perfectly coiffed hair around her finger, eyeing me like I was the punchline to a particularly unfunny joke. I tried to focus on the food. On the way the chicken skin glistened under the warm glow of the antique chandelier, on the roasted potatoes that smelled of butter and rosemary, a comforting scent that now felt entirely out of place. But my appetite faded fast, replaced by a growing knot of apprehension in my stomach. Belle set her wine glass down with a small, deliberate click. The sound, amplified by the tension, seemed louder than the methodical ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. She cleared her throat, that practiced, almost theatrical way she had when she was about to drop a verdict she'd been rehearsing all day. Silas, she began, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, but her eyes were alive with a cold, piercing certainty. We're cutting you off completely. It was delivered with the finality of a guillotine's blade coming down, no anger, just absolute, undeniable conclusion. I didn't flinch. I didn't even breathe. I watched her lips, that perfect line of crimson lipstick she always wore when she wanted to feel powerful, invincible. Maya didn't even look at her mother for permission, she didn't hesitate. You're poor, lazy, and not a good father, she chimed in, her tone as casual as if she'd just ordered a coffee. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. She had been waiting for this moment, ready to brand me with labels that would stick like tar. I felt the room shrink, the walls closing in. The mahogany dining table, usually so grand, suddenly felt too small for all the unspoken words, the accusations, the years of quiet resentment crammed between us. I looked at them, my wife and my daughter, sitting side by side like they'd been cast from the same mold, both wearing that same dismissive expression that said, "We've decided what you are, and that's the end of it. Your fate is sealed." I thought about the days I'd worked double shifts as a night maintenance lead, coming home smelling like oil and sweat, my hands cracked from labor, just to keep food on this very table. I thought about the nights I'd sat up, poring over my battered laptop, building the prototype for Triarch Systems in the small hours before dawn. I thought about the time I taught Maya to ride her bike in this very driveway, running alongside her, her joyful laughter echoing through the neighborhood like I was the best father in the world. But none of that mattered now. They'd made up their minds, sealed the file, and passed judgment. I could have stood up. Slammed my hands on the table. Demanded they remember the sacrifices, the effort, the love. But what was the point? Words had no place here, not now. They had already decided. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't loud, but it sliced through the suffocating tension like a freshly sharpened blade. I reached for it, my fingers trembling just slightly, a reflex born from too many late-night work calls that always carried bad news. But this wasn't that. "Mr. Reed?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, but tinged with something I hadn't heard before, raw excitement. "Congratulations. Triarch Systems just hit a $100 million valuation. The news is live. Wall Street Journal just posted it." I blinked, staring at the phone as if it had grown wings. My mind raced through the math, the countless milestones, the blood and sweat I'd poured into Triarch Systems. The endless nights I'd sat coding while Belle slept soundly beside me. $100 million. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and I almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of something deeper, something that felt like a rope snapping free from my chest, liberating a part of me I thought had died. I slowly lifted my eyes, letting them rest on Belle first, then on Maya. Belle's fork was suspended mid-air, a piece of glistening chicken impaled upon it. Her eyes were wide, her meticulously composed face frozen, cracking under the weight of something she couldn't control. Maya's hand stopped mid-scroll on her phone, her eyes blinking rapidly as if she'd just woken from a deep, unsettling dream. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was a silence charged with a different energy, an expectant, almost fearful stillness. I didn't need to say a word. But I did. My voice was soft, steady, every syllable deliberate. "Excuse me," I said, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt to my head. "You were saying something." It was like the mahogany table itself shuddered. Belle's lips parted, but no words came out, only a faint gasp. Maya's face, usually adorned with a practiced smirk, utterly lost its composure. I let the silence hang there, heavy and undeniable, like a weight they'd have to carry themselves. I felt something shift inside me, something uncoiling, like I'd been holding my breath for too many years and had finally remembered how to let it out. I wanted to stand up. To walk out the door and never look back. But I didn't. I wanted them to sit there in the space they had so meticulously created, to feel every second of their own stunned silence. I wanted them to understand what they'd done, what they had lost, and what they had fundamentally misunderstood. So I just sat there, watching them, the woman who thought she could cut me off, the girl who thought she could belittle me into submission. My phone screen still glowed, the numbers dancing like a promise I'd kept to myself, a silent testament to every sleepless night, $100 million. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday dinner, predictable and forgettable. But it turned out to be the night everything changed. The night I realized that the approval I'd been chasing for so long had always been conditional, that their love, their acceptance, had strings attached to my income, my perceived success, my failures. And in that moment, I didn't feel poor, or lazy, or worthless. I felt free. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what they'd say next, or how they'd try to spin their story. But I knew one thing, I wasn't the man they thought I was, and I never would be again. They didn't always see me this way. I guess that's what hurt most, that once, there was respect in their eyes, even a hint of admiration, a currency that carried me through those endless nights. Back then, I was Silas, the man who worked 16-hour shifts as a night maintenance lead, while meticulously building my software prototype in the small hours before dawn. My uniform was oil-stained, my boots scuffed, but I came home with a paycheck that reliably paid the bills, bought new shoes for Maya, and kept Belle's wine rack full. She bragged about me then. My husband's so driven, she'd tell her friends over coffee in our sunlit kitchen, or in the parent pickup line at Maya's school, her tone a mix of genuine pride in something else, a subtle claim to status she wore like expensive jewelry. Maya used to beam when I'd walk in after a long shift, my hands black with grease. She'd tug at my pant leg and ask, "Daddy, did you fix something today?" I'd scoop her up, the scent of motor oil and her sweet shampoo mixing, and say, "I always fix things, baby girl." But that was before. Before Triarch Systems was even a whispered name on my battered laptop. Before the steady paychecks gave way to an uncertain future I couldn't guarantee. It happened in increments, the respect draining out of their eyes like water from a cracked glass. At first, Belle was patient. She'd leave the porch light on for me when I came home late, ask about my progress with the prototype. I'd talk about infrastructure software, data routing, the complex ways I could make hospital systems safer and more efficient. She'd smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. It was the polite, slightly patronizing smile you give to a child showing you a peculiar rock they found in the yard. Then the bonuses stopped coming. I cashed out my 401k, sold my truck, my baby, the one I'd worked so much overtime to buy, and handed over the keys like I was selling a piece of myself. I poured every sinew of my being into Triarch's first iteration, every sleepless night into the lines of code that would one day build a crucial bridge between hospitals and patients. But money was agonizingly slow to return, slower than I'd hoped. I'd come home to bills stacked like silent accusations on the kitchen counter. Belle's lips would press together so tight the color drained from them. "We need stability, Silas," she'd say, her voice low but edged with something hard, brittle. "Maya needs a future." I'd try to explain the contracts I was chasing, the pilot programs I was testing. I'd tell her about the meeting I had with Northridge Medical, how close we were to getting them on board. She'd nod, but the nod felt empty, like she'd already decided I was failing before I even got a chance to prove myself. Maya was worse. At 17, she'd learned the art of judgment from her mother, perfected it like a craft. "Why can't you be like Mom's friends' husbands?" she'd ask, her tone biting, laced with an adolescent cruelty. I knew those men, real estate agents, mid-level managers at accounting firms, guys with pressed ties and confident smiles who'd never missed a paycheck. They played golf on Saturdays and posted family selfies on Instagram with captions like, "Blessed beyond measure." They'd never risked everything for a dream. They'd never built something from scratch and carried its crushing weight on their back through every setback, every doubt. Because they weren't building what I was. They weren't the ones scouring second-hand laptops at 3 o'clock in the morning to find one that didn't overheat. They didn't spend hours on public library Wi-Fi because the home internet had been cut off that month. They didn't skip meals to buy server space or walk to meetings because their car payment had gone to pay a developer's salary instead. I was doing that. And every sacrifice I made felt like a deposit in a future they'd inevitably benefit from: Maya's tuition, Belle's elaborate dinners with friends, the house that kept its lights on because I refused to let them dim. But they didn't see that anymore. They saw only the man who'd fallen from grace, who traded his steady paychecks and oil-stained coveralls for code and risk. To them, I was the one who let go of their comfort and forced them into a limbo they couldn't name but felt in every unpaid bill, every cancelled vacation, every "no" at the mall. I'd catch Belle's glances sometimes when we passed the bank, the way her eyes lingered on the well-dressed families in line, the men with crisp shirts and thick wallets. She'd squeeze her purse like she was holding something fragile, something that might shatter if she let it go. I tried to reach for her hand, but she'd pull away, pretending to adjust her bag or her phone. Maya would watch us both with that cold, practiced gaze. I knew she parroted her mother's judgment like it was gospel. Belle had made it easy for her. "Your dad's being irresponsible. Your dad's chasing a dream that's costing us everything. Your dad can't even take us out for dinner without worrying about the bill." Maya absorbed those words like ink and water, staining her view of me until there wasn't a drop of the old trust left. I'd sit at my desk at night, staring at the lines of code that looked like salvation and damnation all at once. I'd remember Maya's laughter, the way she'd used to run into my arms like I was her hero. I'd remember the nights Belle brought me a beer while I worked, her eyes warm, her touch soft. Those nights were gone now, replaced by a silence that wrapped around the house like a shroud. Still, I kept going. I didn't quit. I didn't curse them, though God knows I wanted to some days. I just kept typing, kept building, kept believing in something no one else could see. Because I knew deep down that if I could just get Triarch off the ground, if I could just prove to them and to myself that this dream was more than a gamble, maybe, just maybe, they'd look at me the way they used to. But that was the lie I told myself. The truth was simpler, and it hit me hardest on the nights when the code blurred and the exhaustion pressed down like lead: respect isn't given for effort, it's given for results. And the longer I chased my dream, the more I realized no one, especially not the ones you love, will believe in it until it's already too late to doubt. I just had to hope I'd still want their respect when that time finally came. Nobody saw the grind. That's the part that still gnawed at me, the way they all expected to reap the rewards but had no clue what it took to get there. Every night, the glow of my laptop screen was my only company. The rest of the house slept, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old pipes. My back ached from the hours hunched over the keyboard, the code on the screen blurring into lines that danced with fatigue. But I kept going, because every line I wrote, every bug I fixed at 3 a.m., was a step closer to the life I promised myself, the life I promised them, even if they couldn't see it. The public library became my second home. Our internet was shut off more times than I cared to admit, and the library's Wi-Fi felt like a lifeline to the world outside. I'd sit there, surrounded by textbooks and hushed conversations, the smell of old carpet and paper mingling with the taste of instant coffee from the vending machine. I'd lean forward, eyes locked on the screen, willing the software to work, to hold together the complex pieces I'd built from scratch. Triarch Systems, the name itself felt like a prayer, a promise of stability for hospitals, for patients who needed schedules to run on time and data to stay safe. I knew the world didn't see the inherent value in infrastructure software, but I did. I saw the administrators trying to juggle chaos with outdated spreadsheets and whiteboards. I saw the nurses running from ward to ward, never knowing who needed what or when. I wanted to fix that. I wanted to make their world a little easier, even if it meant making mine infinitely harder. Belle never asked about the details anymore. She'd stopped caring after the first few months, after she realized that there were no big checks coming home, no fancy dinners, no spontaneous shopping sprees. She'd given up on the idea that my dream might one day be more than a drain on her patients. Maya followed suit. At first, she'd ask, "How's the company, Dad?" But her tone turned brittle over time, the way a leaf curls under too much sun. Eventually, she stopped asking altogether. I let them. Not out of fear, not because I thought they were right, but because I had work to do. Every second I spent trying to convince them was a second stolen from the grind that would one day prove them wrong. I remember the first time I landed a contract, Northridge Medical. I'd walked into that meeting wearing the one decent suit I owned, gray, a little too tight at the shoulders, but passable. The conference room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. The hospital's CFO, a man named Mr. Albright, sat across from me with a perpetually skeptical eye, flipping through my proposal like it was a menu he hadn't decided on. I pitched them on efficiency, on reducing wait times, on cutting costs in ways that wouldn't get patient care. I talked about real-time scheduling and secure data routing. I showed him the prototype, even though I knew it was rough, even though I knew every time I clicked something there was a chance it might crash. It didn't. It ran. And for a moment, I saw it, the flicker of belief in his eyes. He signed on for a pilot program. I walked out of that hospital with a signed contract in hand, my heart pounding like a triumphant drumbeat. I wanted to call Belle, wanted to tell her I'd done it, that all those nights she'd called me irresponsible had led to this. But I didn't. I went home, put the contract on my desk, and opened my laptop. Because one deal wasn't enough. One deal didn't pay off the house or fix the broken trust. I needed more. I needed momentum. 2 more hospitals signed on in the next 6 months. The revenue was slow at first, smaller deals, cautious steps, but I saw the pattern, the way word of mouth spread among administrators who were desperate for any solution that genuinely worked. My phone started ringing. My email inbox, once a wasteland of rejection and spam, filled with inquiries. But I kept quiet. I didn't boast about the wins. I didn't come home with balloons or pop champagne in the living room. Part of me thought I should have. Part of me wondered if maybe that was what they'd been waiting for, some grand gesture that proved I wasn't just a man playing with a toy. But that wasn't me. I'd sit at the dinner table, listening to Belle complain about the rising price of groceries, about the way her friends' husbands could whisk them away on lavish vacations without worrying about the bills. Maya would chime in about homecoming dresses and the latest phone models she desperately wanted, like the whole world revolved around the designer label she wore. I'd listen, nod, say, "We'll see," and then go back to work. Because every hour I spent grinding was another hour closer to the future I was meticulously building. Sometimes, when the house was dark and I'd close the last bug report for the night, I'd lean back in my chair and stare at the ceiling. The silence felt heavy, but also honest. In that space, there was no judgment, no sideways glances, no sighs that carried 1,000 unspoken criticisms. There was just me and the work. The grind. I started to understand something that changed the way I looked at everything. Respect isn't given for the hours you work in secret, it's given for the results that can't be ignored. I could build the best system in the world, but until I showed them the money, the contracts, the headlines, they'd never truly see it. That realization hurt, but it also hardened me. So I let them ignore me. I let them believe I was a failure. I let them talk to their friends about how I'd let them down. Because I knew what they didn't. I knew that the foundation was already in place, that the calls were coming, that the grind was paying off in ways they'd never imagined. And when the day came that my phone buzzed with that one call, the call that would change everything, I'd be ready. But until then, I'd keep my head down, keep the code flowing, keep the contracts coming. Because one day, they'd look at me and see what I'd known all along, that success isn't built in the spotlight, it's built in the grind, and the silent nights, and the hours nobody else sees. Back to dinner. I couldn't get the taste of that chicken out of my mouth, and not because it was good, but because it was seasoned with the salt of resentment. The room seemed smaller now, like the walls were leaning in, pressing me down. Belle and Maya sat across from me, side by side, a united front of judgment that used to be my family. Their eyes gleamed with that same cold light I'd seen too many times before, except tonight, it felt final, like the executioner's sword was poised above my head. Belle leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, like she was closing off any last path I might have had to her grace. "We can't keep pretending you're an equal, Silas," she said, her voice sharp, measured, every word placed with the precision of a scalpel. I watched her lips move, the way her wine glass left a faint, perfectly round ring on the polished wood table. It used to be my table, our table, back when we built it together one Saturday morning with leftover lumber and too many laughs to count. Now it felt like a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. "You don't even bring in real money," she continued, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized weeks ago. Maya, eager as always to impress her mother, piled on without hesitation. "Mom does everything. You just sit there." Her words hit like darts aimed at all the places I'd built up my armor but never quite sealed. I sat there, staring at the two of them, feeling the gap between us stretch into a canyon I wasn't sure I could ever cross. That's when my phone rang. Deidre's name lit up the screen, and I almost didn't answer. Maybe some part of me wanted to keep the victory to myself, to savor it alone before the world tried to pry it from my hands. But instinct took over, and I swiped the screen with a thumb that trembled just a little. "Hey, Deidre," I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. On the other end, her tone was crisp, bright, the kind of tone that didn't waste time. "Mr. Reed, congratulations," she said, and in that instant, the room froze. Triarch Systems just hit a $100 million valuation. The news is live. Wall Street Journal just posted. I sat in my home office late at night, the cool glow of the monitor washing over my face as I meticulously studied the pension scheme I'd helped draft. Belle's name was right there, in bold letters, nestled among dozens of others. When she'd left her teaching job to chase her wellness app dream, I discreetly slipped her into the Hartwell Extended Benefits Plan under spousal courtesy. She'd called it sweet at the time, a sign that I was finally acting like a provider. But it wasn't charity, it was insurance, for me. She'd never bothered to read the fine print, the line that gave me discretion to restructure terms as the controlling signatory. She'd never asked what I was really doing every night in this room, poring over spreadsheets and pension ledgers like they were holy texts. The pension system was a living, breathing thing, a tangled mass of dependencies and clauses that could make or break a person if you knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. Every late night at the office, every coffee run to the accounting team, every innocent question I'd asked Monroe, the plan administrator, about the pension plan's intricacies, they all added up. I'd built a blueprint in my mind, each detail a weapon she'd never see coming. That was my real job, the one she couldn't grasp, building a fortress of knowledge, one clause at a time. I remembered the day she'd proudly told her mother about leaving teaching. "He's such a good man," she'd said, smiling at me like I was a child who'd just tied his own shoes. "He set me up with benefits so I could chase my dreams." That's what a supportive husband does. Her mother had smirked, the same way Belle did when she thought she was winning. Well, let's hope his support holds up. I'd sat at the table that night, nodding like the devoted husband, letting them think I was grateful to be part of their show. But inside, I'd already seen the plan. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every obscure clause that governed early payouts. I'd drafted some of them myself, long before she ever thought to ask. She didn't understand how these things worked. She saw the pension as a safety net, a backup plan in case her wellness app didn't take off. But I saw it as leverage. I saw it as the lock she'd chained herself to without realizing I held the key. I'd written the clause myself, one line tucked in among 100 others, early withdrawals subject to discretionary adjustment at the discretion of the plan administrator. She'd never questioned who that administrator was. She'd assumed it was the same corporate suit who'd signed off on the rest of the paperwork. But it wasn't. It was me. The secretary, she told everyone, was too small to matter. I remembered the night she mentioned wanting to cash out some of her pension, just in case. She'd smiled sweetly, as if asking for a simple favor. "It's just a little something for my business," she'd said, stirring her herbal tea with that air of innocence she wore like expensive perfume. I'd nodded, playing the part. "Of course, Belle," I'd said, my voice steady. "Whatever you need." She'd kissed my cheek like I was a child. "You're the best, Silas. You really are." I'd watched her walk out of the room, and I'd thought, I really am. Because every night in this office, every hour I'd spent dissecting those clauses, every whispered conversation with the plan's lawyer, they'd all led to this moment. The moment where she'd think she was stepping into her future, only to realize she was stepping into a bear trap. When I filed the paperwork for her early withdrawal, I followed every regulation to the letter. I sent her the forms. She signed them, smiling that same triumphant smile she used when she thought she'd won. She didn't even read the new terms I'd attached, the ones that detailed her tax liabilities, the ones that cited the discretionary clause that gave me the final say. She didn't ask why the payout was lower than she'd expected. She just saw the numbers and assumed she was in control. She never once asked why her sweet husband was so eager to help her cash out. Because to Belle, I was still the man who answered phones and fetched coffee, the man who gave her pension benefits like a dog offering a bone. The day the payment hit her account, she texted me a heart emoji. "Thanks for being so supportive," she wrote. I stared at the screen, feeling the irony settle like a stone in my gut. Supportive. She'd never know that I'd structured the withdrawal to trigger an automatic tax penalty, one that would freeze her business account until she paid up. And she'd never understand that by the time she called her lawyer, the pension plan would have been rolled into my private trust, sealed behind layers of corporate policy she'd never unravel. That's the thing about ambition, it doesn't always show its teeth. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it's the man behind the desk, the one who nods and says, "Of course, whatever you need." I thought about her words, "You're not ambitious, Silas. You're just safe." I thought about the night she'd come home from those exclusive Red Oaks dinner parties, gleefully telling me about all the men who tried to hit on her, how she laughed them off. "You're my safe place," she'd say. But I wasn't her safe place. I was her exit plan. And I turned that exit plan into a lockbox she couldn't pick. The night I finalized the last clause, I poured myself a whiskey and stared at the screen, watching the cursor blink like a heartbeat. I thought about all the times she'd looked at me with that practiced patience, like I was a project she'd one day outgrow. I thought about the smirk that spread across her face when she talked about her starter husband. And I thought about the spa club, the look on her face when Monroe, the accountant she unknowingly tried to bribe, told her the truth about the pension. The glass dropping from her hand. The silence that followed. That was the moment she realized the game had changed. But this was the moment she'd realized the true price of underestimating me. I hit submit. The pension plan shifted. The forms processed. Her early withdrawal triggered, complete with the tax implications she'd never seen coming. And I sat there, breathing in the silence, feeling the weight of every late night, every whispered conversation, every piece of the puzzle I'd laid down so carefully. She'd never see it coming. She'd blame the system. 2 weeks after the spa club revelation, the world outside our home seemed to move on, oblivious. But inside the house, the air was thick with something unspoken. Belle and I moved around each other like strangers who'd been left in the same waiting room. She'd come home from work, her eyes hard, her phone always in her hand, and I'd pretend to be diligently working on Triarcha's latest quarterly report. We'd have dinner in silence, she'd push the rice around on her plate, feign a smile, and then disappear upstairs to one of her endless FaceTime calls with Royce, her business partner, or the lawyers she thought I didn't know about. I knew. I always knew. The day she served me divorce papers was a Friday. She picked Fridays for everything important, job interviews, spa days, manipulations. Fridays felt fresh, like a new chapter was starting, and she liked to feel like she was writing the story. I heard the car in the driveway before I heard the front door open. I was in the study, reviewing the merger documents for the spa chain I just folded under Carter and Layton Capital. My kingdom was expanding, and yet my hands paused when I heard the front door. There was something about her footsteps that felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this moment in front of the mirror. She came into the study holding a manila envelope like it was a peace offering, but the smile on her face was the same one she used on waiters she didn't plan to tip. "Silas," she said, her voice sugary sweet, cloying. "I think we both know this has been a long time coming." She set the envelope on the desk, sliding it across the polished oak like she was dealing cards. I didn't flinch. I'd seen enough backroom deals to know when a bluff was coming. She watched me, her eyes cold, daring me to react. "I'm filing for divorce," she said, savoring each word like it was a hard-won victory. "It's for the best. We've outgrown each other. I'm finally making a smart move." I picked up the envelope, turning it over in my hands as if it might bite. Inside, I already knew, were the documents she'd spent weeks preparing, meticulously arranged by Royce's lawyer friend. I imagined she expected me to panic, to argue, to beg for another chance. But I didn't. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my own envelope, thicker, heavier, each page a nail in the coffin of the life she thought she was building. I slid it across to her, watching the manufactured confidence drain from her face like wine spilling from a broken glass. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a notch higher, eyes darting from the envelope to me like I'd flipped the table in the middle of her game. I didn't answer right away. I wanted the silence to press against her, to remind her that she'd underestimated the man behind the desk for too long. "Proof," I said finally, my voice even, devoid of any emotion. "Proof of marital fraud. Pension misuse. Unauthorized access to company systems." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, the lines of legal text swimming in front of her eyes. "Sweetheart," I added, letting the words sink in like a blade, "this house, your pension, your app, none of it was ever yours alone." She tried to speak, her lips parting, but no words came out. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Silas," she whispered, her voice cracking, frail. What is this?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "It's the truth," I said. "The truth you never bothered to look for while you were busy playing Queen of the Starter Husbands. Every dollar you moved, every account you dipped into, that's all documented. Every time you used my company's resources to prop up your little wellness app, every time you siphoned funds under the table with Royce's help, it's all here." I tapped the envelope with one finger. "Your signature is on every page." Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for an escape. You can't do this, she stammered. You can't just take everything away. I let a small smile creep onto my face, the kind that says, I've already won. I'm not taking everything, I said calmly. I'm taking what was always mine. You wanted to cash out your pension. You got it, minus the tax penalties you didn't read about. You wanted to launch that app. You did, using my company's money. You wanted to move on. Here's your chance. But don't expect to take the house I built, or the car you drive, or the accounts you thought you were so clever hiding. I let the words hang there, heavy and sharp, because I own it all now. She collapsed into the chair across from me, the divorce papers still clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Her voice was a whisper, shaky and small. Why? She asked, tears welling in her eyes. Why would you do this to me? I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and for the first time in years, I let the cold calculation slip into my voice. Because every time you called me your starter husband, I said, you reminded me that you never saw me as more than a stepping stone. Every time you laughed at my ambition, you gave me one more reason to prove you wrong. I gave you everything, Belle, and you spat on it. So now I'm giving you exactly what you deserve, a clean break, with none of the benefits you thought you'd get for free. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing now, the tears smudging the makeup she'd applied so carefully that morning. I felt no pity. I felt nothing but the profound satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. She thought she was making a smart move, but she'd never read the fine print, never considered that the man behind the desk was the one holding the real power. I stood up, straightening my tie, the gesture as final as a closing argument. You wanted a divorce, I said, my voice flat, unyielding. You've got it. But don't expect me to be the man you can run back to when it all falls apart. Because from now on, Belle, you're on your own. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy, and I saw the dawning realization. She lost. She gambled on my silence, on my patience, on my willingness to be the man who always said yes. But I wasn't that man anymore. I walked around the desk, the papers still between us like a battlefield littered with casualties. I opened the door and gestured toward the hall. You can leave now, I said. The driver's waiting. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, and then she stood.